Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
That public official must, in writing, explain how that person has violated the Constitution. Because, again, the separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. And from this day forward, if anyone says that to you, and they're in public office, or serve in any agency in any official capacity, they have to point out exactly where you have violated the Constitution, because you have not. And from this day forward, that phrase should have no power over people of all faiths ever again in America.
Those were the words of Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick in the Oval Office at a meeting with Trump and the Religious Liberty Commission, which he serves as the chair for. It's a line of reasoning we've covered a lot here on Highest Power, Church and State. Republicans like to ignore the Establishment Clause that prohibits the government from establishing, endorsing, or favoring a religion. And they ignored the Free Exercise Clause, which says people can be free to be part of a religion without the government interfering. And they dismiss the separation of church and state as simply a part of a letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut. According to the Religious Liberty Commission's report that released on Friday, religious liberty, quote, acts as a bridge between church and state. Here's Interfaith Alliance President and CEO, Reverend Paul Rauschenbusch.
All throughout our history, this revolutionary idea of religious freedom has also been tested and challenged, particularly by some strains of white Protestant Christians who want to name America as a Christian nation that they conveniently remake in their own image so that they might hold privilege and power. We are in another one of those perilous moments. Religious liberty now is contested as we celebrate our 250th anniversary. From January 20th of 2025, Interfaith Alliance has tracked the way this administration has weaponized faith, simultaneously making brazen claims about God being on their side, while attacking any faith tradition and expression that is not in lockstep with their own political agenda and worldview.
Rauschenbusch said the report was, quote, a betrayal of the original intention of the promise of religious freedom guaranteed in the First Amendment. The report and the commission behind it fail to represent and uplift the importance of religious diversity and tolerance for all faiths in our country, not just a special chosen few. The report is a wish list of divisive, unpopular ideas far-right religious groups have pushed for years, unquote. One of the reasons Dan Patrick dismisses the separation of church and state is that the Texas State Board of Education is now requiring over 5 million public school students to read the Bible in public schools. Of course, they're doing it under the guise of the Bible reading being literature, but everyone knows this is a Christian nationalist ploy for power. Texas Republicans would lose their minds if Muslims were able to force public school students to read the Quran. While there's much we could explore about the politics in this story, there's also a theological conversation to be had. CNN recently released an analysis piece by Zachary B. Wolfe titled, In Trump's America, Two Very Different Views of Christianity and Politics Emerge. According to Wolfe, quote, a report released Friday by the Religious Liberty Commission and paneled by President Donald Trump suggests effectively tearing down the wall between church and state in the United States by providing more public money to religious organizations, giving churches a more direct role in politics. But argument from Trump officials that the U.S. is a Christian nation is at odds with the views of the values of Christians on the left, who think government should do more to help people who need it, unquote. The article goes on to contrast the versions of Christianity presented in two recently released books, Vice President J.D. Vance's book, Communion, and Senator and Reverend Raphael Warnock's book, The Crooked Places Made Straight. So at the heart of today's story about politics in the U.S. is a story about theological formation in the U.S. When I first enrolled at Northern Seminary in 2018 for my master's degree, I had no idea the theological worlds that would be open to me. My previous education was from Independent Baptist Elementary through high school, a Bachelor of Arts degree in Bible from Bob Jones University, and 38 years in white fundamentalism and conservative evangelicalism. My first 3 professors at Northern were a black man, an Asian man, and a woman. All I'd ever sat under in the past were white men. My Northern professors shared biblical scholarship with me and perspectives from entire traditions of Christian thought that I never knew existed. During my second class at Northern, I was introduced to the writings of Douglas Campbell, who is a professor at Duke Divinity School, and ever since then I've enjoyed reading some of the scholarship coming out of Duke. For me, theological exploration hasn't felt like an existential crisis of my entire universe crashing in on itself. For me, learning about theology has felt more like exploring the universe, discovering new worlds or galaxies that offer unique perspectives on the whole that I never knew existed. There's something profoundly healing about hearing the way others interpret reality, noticing points of commonality as well as differences, and then being together in a relationship that holds space for one another without wielding power over one another. Another professor at Duke Divinity School is Curtis Freeman. He's the Ruth D. Duncan Director of the Baptist House of Studies and Research Professor of Theology and Baptist Studies. I saw him at the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship General Assembly in Jacksonville 2 weeks ago, and because so much of our modern political discourse is driven by theology, I wanted to hear his thoughts about the role of theological education in resisting Christian nationalism today. So for today's episode, here's my conversation with Curtis Freeman. When people today choose to enroll in seminary, what are some of the reasons they give for doing so? And then why do students choose Duke more specifically?
Yeah, thanks, Rick, for asking, because it's a really important question now. I think there was a time when people went to seminaries because they had a very clear sense of calling. The church had evaluated that and maybe even credentialed them in a way, licensed them. And some churches still do this, some denominations, but increasingly now what happens is that they sense a calling, and they may be in a congregation that doesn't even support the direction of that call. Like we've just seen recently that you have women that are experiencing calls in the Southern Baptist Convention. That happens all the time. And so I have 2 of them at my table today, this morning at our breakfast that we're in SBC churches, and they realized in our conversations that if they're going to follow the direction of their call, they're going to have to find a place that affirms that. And so, there still are people that are sensing that call, but oftentimes what falls out now are the congregational work that is done to help people discern those calls. So oftentimes they wander into these seminaries. But it's an amazing thing to see that you have these people come and you're able to guide them. But I still believe that what seminaries are doing now, in our very best, we're trying to equip people who are called by God, led by the Spirit, to follow the direction of the ministry that they're being called, and make sure that they are equipped with the kinds of skills that they need to study Scripture, if it's preaching, if it's counseling, whatever it is, to get those kinds of skills and courses and so forth that they can follow into that ministry.
And I know a lot of seminaries started with specific denominations. Is that less of a concern today for people to find a seminary that's particular to their denomination?
Well, I think it's increasingly more complicated because it used to be that denominations were started. I'll give you an example. The very first seminaries in America that were created, the first one was Andover Seminary, 1808, and followed by Princeton, 1812, and then Newton Institute, it was called, 1825. So that was Congregationalist, Presbyterians, and Baptists. Now there were colleges, universities started before that, but specifically 3 years beyond college, seminaries started back in that time, and so it was a very denominational thing. And so if you were congregational, you went to this one, Baptist, Presbyterian. But now, and then the Methodists came along. Duke is a Methodist school. We were started, and it started as a college back in earlier, but in 1924. And so the Divinity School started at 1926. And we're affiliated with the United Methodist Church, and probably the largest number of our students are United Methodist and then Pan Methodist. But we've got students, Baptist, which I work with at Duke, are the largest, second largest group. We have Anglicans, Episcopalians, Pentecostals, Presbyterians, Reformed, non-denominational, all sorts. And so it's a much more complicated story. And people's denominational commitments are not the same as they were at one time. Because, people start out in one denomination, they go to another. Maybe they're in a denomination, but it's not the theological type that they're looking for. They're looking for something more progressive and so forth. So it's a much more complicated story than it was in 1808 when Andover was formed as the first seminary in America. But it's still, I think, something that is very needed, because the kinds of skills and studies that you are engaged in the seminary are not the sort of things that you can just pick up in a book and read, or even learn on the job. They're very specialized sorts of things. You still need that in person, on the site experience doing ministry. That's very important. But there still is a real important place for seminary studies and preparation.
Have you noticed, I know most people are probably going to seminary for church ministry, but I know there's some people that get into writing, or like a Caitlin Scheiss, who's with the Holy Post.
Caitlin's one of our students.
Yeah, and have you found more of people that are going to seminary for some of those more outlier type?
Well, I think it varies from seminary to seminary. And there are some seminaries that really major. They lean into I know that Yale Divinity School is leaning, for example, into more interfaith things. There are several other places that are doing that. Some are leading to more nonprofit work. And our school, because we are related to the United Methodist Church, and because we've had a historic commitment going back to 1926 to preparation for the church, and people to become ministers, still the bulk of our students, I'd say probably, 60-70% of our graduates in the master's programs are going into some kind of church congregational ministry, chaplaincy. Nonprofits, they do that sort of thing as well, but that's probably less of a number. But there are some schools where that may be the larger portion of the student body.
That makes sense. So, when I chose to enroll at Northern Seminary, I was in the middle of rethinking a lot of my conservative evangelical fundamentalist upbringing. Right. And I had kind of gotten to the point prior to enrolling where I didn't know what I believed about a lot of things. Right. And there was also the sense in which I didn't even know what I didn't know.
Right.
And one thing I loved about seminary was how it introduced me to entire worlds of theology and history of theological development that I had no idea even existed. I just assumed we believed what everyone historically had believed for 2,000 years with very little change. Right. and everything. How does the theological education at a school like Duke open up those theological worlds for people to learn?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and I find that, and I've been teaching at Duke now for 25 years. I taught at a Christian college for 15 years before that, so I've been doing it quite some time. I was on the other end of preparing people to go to seminaries and kind of get the preparatory work. Oftentimes now, just like you said, there are so many students that I meet that are drawn to study in seminary because they really enjoy studying the Bible or theology or church history, and they want to do it more. And yet, a seminary is not just a place to come and study. It's a place to be formed and prepared to help other people learn what it means to love God and neighbor and engage in the world, spreading the good news. And so there is work that you really need to do beforehand. There still are a lot of students that just show up and say, I'm just here to study. I don't know, I'm trying to figure it out. But when I meet students that are in that process of discerning, I oftentimes will say, take a gap year, and let me give you 4 or 5 books here to talk about spiritual discernment, and begin to figure out and have conversations with your minister, begin to test things out and see, do you think that you are led to pastoral or congregational ministry, or maybe you're wanting to do something more in a kind of public witness that you're doing, public theology, which is really needed. I mean, I mean, we don't have a degree in podcast, ministries, but like we have a lot of people that are doing public theology and that sort of thing. So if you kind of know where your direction of calling is, and more particularly who you are, and kind of like, what am I a teacher? Am I a pastor? Am I a counselor? Then when you come to seminary, you are able to focus your direction a little bit more. But it's a very expensive and time commitment you pour into it to just spend 3 years figuring things out. Mm-hmm. It can work out. I mean, God can do amazing things with people, but I think it's really good to have some time of discernment before you get in with church leaders, with trusted friends and all, to help you begin to discern what is at least the direction of the calling that you're being led to.
And how does like the diversity of the faculty help with some of the places to explore? Because like I never heard of liberation theology before seminary. Yeah. I never heard of Howard Thurman. Like
right.
there was a lot of that was interesting.
Right. No, that's a really, really good question. And I serve in a place where I have not only wonderful students with diversity, because like we have students that come not only from all kinds of denominational and non-denominational places, but they also come from theological points of view that are some very much, well, not we probably don't have too many very right to the center folk, but there are folks that are right of center that end up coming to our school, and a lot of folks left the center, and so you're in classes with people that don't look like you. You may have come from a place where they even say, well, we don't ordain ministers, and you're sitting right next to people, a woman who is preparing to become a priest in the Episcopal Church. And so you've got to figure out, well, how do I deal with that? But then, the wonderful thing also about the thing that I've been exposed to is that I have colleagues that, like, I chaired for 8 years the theological division at Duke, and I had 12 people in my division. So they taught everything. We had Catholics, Presbyterians, Anglicans, Episcopals, Baptists, you name it, non-denom. We had people that do womanist theology, liberation theology, very conservative Catholic theology. Then the stuff that I do, which I don't even know what you call it, I call it kind of dissenter, kind of crazy right wing, some kind of left wing stuff. But all of that stuff is really interesting because students can, if there is that kind of diversity, they can really learn a lot. And that's why I say that if you really are, like you were saying, you wanted to explore a wider range, then it helps to be able to look at a school that says, okay, there's not just one or two people teaching in this field, there are like 7 or 8, and they teach at a wide range. But that diversity of perspectives, I think, has been really rich. And when you're worshiping with people, you're in classes with people, you're in fellowship with people, you're in relation with them, and they come from churches and backgrounds and life experiences very different from yours. It just changes your experience. Yeah. And so that's been a great blessing to me to live with people that are different than I am.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're training people theologically, and as we look at the national conversation that we're having today, a lot of it sits at the intersection of faith and politics, especially with the rise of Christian nationalism. Yeah. When I'm not sure what media you consume, but when you listen or read to the national media, how do you think they are doing in covering the role of theology in our political discourse? Yeah,
well, that's a good question. I think that I wouldn't call it the secular media, but the mainstream media oftentimes really doesn't have people that are trained theologically or in any kind of even religious perspective, and it just gets put on their reporting docket, and so they're doing stories. And oftentimes when I talk with people that are here at a conference like we're at now, and they go, "Oh, what are y'all doing? What group is this?" And they, "Oh, I didn't know that they're, well, what kind of Baptists are these?" "Well, I thought the only ones who were like the Southern Baptists." And so they oftentimes don't have that kind of perspective to be able to see the nuance. I was at and this is just a segue or a sidebar. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago that I've been going to for 30 years. It's a college theological society. It's Catholic theologians that meet every year, and then about 300 of us. And the theme was Christian nationalism. And one of the things that I realized, and it is even Catholic theologians and all, when they were talking about Christian nationalism, most of them were thinking about like crazy Protestants. They didn't really realize, and well, some of them actually do, but they didn't name it as that. But there's like a whole brand of Catholic, what I would call Catholic Christian nationalism. It's called integralism. It's been around a long time. But this is the kind of stuff that you see with J.D. Vance that he's getting. Well, it doesn't look anything like Pete Hegseth. They actually, those kind of people don't even get along. They don't talk the same language. And oftentimes, even trained theologians aren't actually looking at the nuances like you've been able to break down. But I think it's really, really helpful to, when you've got something as critical as what we're seeing on the national scene that has really become polarizing politically and religiously in the way this is, that we really need nuanced understanding of how did this result. And you may want to ask me about this because it's something I'm very passionate about. I think that what happened, and you spent a lot of time talking about this on your podcast and your writing, what happened on January 6, 2021 was not a political event entirely. It was a religious event. And I think the cause of that, it wasn't really the politics that we saw overtly there, being churned up. It really has been a failure of the Christian church to catechize, to make disciples of people, so that we just have brought people into our churches and they don't know what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And more than that, they don't even know what Christians have taught. They don't know that from the very beginning, and this is the thing that I've been studying, is looking at the ways that Christians historically have brought people into the church, what do we call catechesis. And that one of the very first things that they would do is you became a catechumen and you were examined, your life was examined. And like if you they would want to know what kind of work that you do. They did all sorts of life investigation before you could even sign up to become a Christian, to study. But then when you finally got into baptism, before they even asked you if you wanted to follow Jesus Christ, if Jesus was Lord, they asked you the question, do you renounce Satan and all his ways? Now, it's easy to say yes, but it's the all his ways. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? And I've written 3 little books for people, for pastors, for parents, for people that are beginning this journey, to try to understand what that means. What are all these ways? How do you begin to name that? And I'm not just talking about like gremlins flying through the air. I'm talking about social political realities. How the enchantment of mammon and the economic structures have captured the church. How Leviathan, the power of the political power of the state, has enchanted and overtaken the church and instrumentalized religion. How Beelzebul, which is taking religion and using it for a kind of political end. Being able to name that and see it, and so that we begin to see that following Jesus is not just following what the culture is telling me. So, that's the work of the churches. It's also the work of seminaries, but the churches have to do better work and catechesis in preparing people. And then when you have these people that have been well prepared, that they can help train others in that. That's what we ought to be doing in seminary, which is sort of the higher level work.
So given the lack of theological literacy in the media, especially like in knowing the differences between a Pete Hegseth and a Bishop Robert Barron and a Paula White and a Robert Jeffress, like how do you feel seminary students who graduate can help people who write about these things professionally and cover these things learn? Would it be more like a private conversations and friendships type thing, or is there?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways. I mean, I point people to your podcasts and to your articles all the time, because I think what you do in a way that oftentimes even my brilliant colleagues, as much as I love them and read and study, sometimes they have a hard time bringing things at a level where people go, oh yeah, I understand that. And you have your podcast. My wife, I said, why don't you listen to this podcast with this guy? You're going to probably meet him. You hadn't met her. But she listened to a couple of your podcasts when we were driving down here. She said, that guy really makes sense. So there's a place for that. I think your work really meets that. I think that Matthew Taylor, I got into his podcast when he did that, what was it called? The charismatic
revival theory.
Yeah. That really, I thought, was the first time I began to see that how it wasn't just the Reformed dominionism. I didn't see the connections of how how Peter Wagner had sort of flipped Pentecostalism and put this new thing of politics into it. So I think there are a lot of people that are doing that work. We have a couple of classes that colleagues that I have that are teaching a class on Christian nationalism, and that's been helpful for the students to be able to know how to communicate that in their churches, because it is something. And I think the harder thing, once you understand that, how do you deal with your family and your friends and fellow church members that have embraced these ideas? And as you pointed out, a lot of it is coming through the worship that they're engaged in every Sunday. They don't even know it. They're just imbibing in it.
Yeah, there's so much that's below their awareness of what's going on. So you mentioned seminary can be expensive, and a lot of people don't have the time or the money to go get a full degree.
Right.
Are there ways that schools of theology can help educate the general public outside of a normal degree classroom situation, even if it's like newsletters or open classes and stuff like that?
Well, you're a Northern graduate, and so Northern has got a program like that. I think there are a few of them. Fuller Seminary has done a good bit of this. There are others. We do a little bit of that sort of lay education and modules of programs. Not as much as we should, but I think there are some really good programs around like that you can get into that, and we used to have these MOOC classes that has kind of passed now, but there are people that are doing that sort of thing, but then there also are, and I think this is a good thing to look out for, and if you don't know, go and ask some people who are reading this. But there are a lot of theologians, biblical scholars, historians that try to write things that are aimed toward a lay audience, and that's why I spent those 3 books writing for pastors and parents and lay people and children. I mean, one of the greatest things to me was getting letters back from young people who said, I read your book, Pilgrim Letters, and I read it when my pastor gave it to me or my parents gave it to me, and it's helped me to know what I'm doing as a new follower of Christ. So yeah, I want to have that kind of an audience and a ministry to people, but not everybody does that. But there are some really, really fine people, and having just a kind of a basic bibliography of books that said, like, here's a book, if you want to know what the New Testament is, here's a really good elementary place to start.
Yeah. Well, I know it's a scary time today with all the different stories that are going on and all the power plays that are happening, and a lot of people, it's hard to distinguish even know like what the theology is that's driving a lot of the people who are posturing for power. So I appreciate the work you guys are doing to help theologically educate people and to help make the world a more neighborly, loving place, and coming on here and sharing that with us.
Good. Rick, listen, it's great to be here with you, and I really appreciate your podcast, your work, everything. It's good work and really needed.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Thursday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.